going to be talking about point of view and why it matters, what the differences are, what the benefits are, what the drawbacks are, all that fun stuff. So, first person. This is less common in adult genres, especially in epic fantasy genres and things like that. First person gives us the ability to really get ingrained in a character, really get ingrained in who they are and who they can be. What ultimately what makes them tick, what makes them feel good, what makes them dream. It makes us feel truly ingrained in the character because we feel like we generally talk about ourselves in first person. I did this, I did that. So reading about someone else talking about themselves in first person makes them feel more real, more tactile, more in depth. The one drawback with first person is that when you switch point of views, you have to make sure that the reader understands that you switch point of views. The reason why is because otherwise they'll just think it's the old point of view. Another drawback is the fact that you have to make sure you describe the character and do so in the not tropey way. And when I say not tropey, I mean tropes can be good, for sure, 100%, but they can also be bad. There's one trope called the mirror trope, and it's basically where people didn't know how to describe people in first person, so as a result they just said, I brushed my black hair while I stared at my green eyes in the mirror. It's basically the getting ready scene. It's actually really kind of obnoxious. Most people hate the mirror scene. It's gotten really old, been done badly too many times. It's kind of like the miscommunication trope. Can it be done well? Yes. Is it done well most of the time? No. Most of the time it's just really annoying. So with first person, that is one of the drawbacks, but you can easily fix it by simply doing it with action, saying, I tossed my blonde hair. Like, you may not have someone think they have blonde hair, but generally you know what color hair you have, so mentioning it within a manuscript makes perfect sense. You can also say things like, I glared at her, my green eyes getting brighter, or if it's like magic or something like that. Or alternatively, if it's not magic, you can always say like, I stared into his brown eyes, knowing how deeply in contrast they were with my blue ones. Those are ways that you can help make sure that you delineate the description of your character, because that is the one issue with first person. As far as third person goes, you have two options that are most popular with third person. Third person limited, which means that it's like Harry Potter. It's all from Harry Potter's point of view, but it's third person. Or you can do third person omniscient, which is more common in like epic fantasy novels. Although third person limited with switching point of views can also be common in epic fantasy novels. Third person omniscient is where you are able to reach inside everyone's head and head hop between it. Now, I will clarify. A lot of people say head hopping is bad. The difference is when you head hop at random versus just saying, this is what he thought, this is what she thought in the same scene. If it's cohesive to the scene, then it's not head hopping, it's omniscient. If it is not cohesive to the scene and you're just jumping around willy-nilly, then it's head hopping. So you got to make sure that if you're doing it's also a third person limited issue. If you are in third person limited and you're in, let's say, there's two characters, Jack and Bob. If you're in Jack's head when it's third person limited and then suddenly go into Bob's head, that's a problem because you're in third person limited. You need to stay in the head that you're supposed to be staying in for that point of view, or you need to delineate somehow that you're switching point of views. I would recommend, if you are doing third person, doing some sort of like asterisks or three little markings or things like that in the middle. You may have seen those in books sometimes. That makes it much more fun for the reader aesthetically, but it also makes it so it's easier to see, oh, we are switching points of view now, I need to adjust. One thing to be careful of with third person omniscient is there can be such a thing as too many characters. You gotta be careful with too many characters. If you have a drastic amount of characters, it can get really overwhelming really fast. Another thing that you'll want to take into consideration is, do you want to use present or past tense? Present tense, especially with first person, makes us feel generally a little bit more like imminent danger, a little bit more on the edge of our seats. First person past tense makes it feel a little bit more like a journal entry that we're reading. Third person limited is almost always in past tense because it feels the most natural, but third person limited present tense can be used to heighten that sense of stress, especially since third person can feel a little bit more removed and a little bit less intense than first person. With third person omniscient, I'd almost always say past is the way you want to go, just because present can be confusing with omniscient because of all the jumping around. Doesn't mean you can't be done, but it can be confusing. Last thing that I want to talk about is the reason why future and second person aren't typically used. Future tense isn't typically used because of the fact that obviously saying he will do this, like writing the book like it's prophecy, feels weird. We just want to know what he did do, not what he will do. We want it to, it feels too passive. It feels too weird for most people. It's jarring. Second person is pretty much entirely used for choose your own adventure novels, which are incredibly popular. However, I would highly recommend writing a choose your own adventure novel to see if it's your style first, purely because of the fact that it is actually a lot harder to write than people think, because you often will say, hey, here's all the options, and then someone who's beta reading will say, but I wanted this option. And you'll be like, well, I don't have that option. And they'll be like, well, I want it. So I would highly recommend doing a couple practice runs if you're going to do choose your own adventure at all, because that can get really, really sticky. I've done a couple choose your own adventure short stories, funnily enough, and even with those, I've had people enjoy them, but they've been like, hey, I wanted to do this, or hey, I wanted to do that. In that case, I would say limit the setting a little bit and limit the options. So like they're on a ship, so they can only do so many things on a ship. They're on a farm and they can't leave the farm for whatever reason, so they only can do so many things on the farm. That makes it a little bit more concrete. That's probably the reason why you'll see a lot of choose your own adventure novels have one setting. And if they have multiple settings, they're usually huge because of the fact that they have so many different options. As far as all these different viewpoints, I would say it depends also on your age range and your genre. Fantasy is far more common to do third person, but first person is definitely an option. Young adult, first person is actually very common, but third person is also very common. With adult, third person is the most common, with first person being more rare. And with children's books, both are equally utilized, though a lot of times third person tends to work a little better just because it's easier to digest for the reader. And it's easier to give all the information that you need to with children's books, because there's generally a lot of world building that you have to do in a little amount of pages. And so it's a lot easier to info dump on the reader than it is in a natural way, because third person, than it is to do so in first person. Because if the person already knows, that may seem weird. Or you can just go straight up childish and go, hi, I'm so-and-so, and I do this. And that's totally fine in a children's novel. But that would be probably the way you'd have to do it if you're going to do first person in a children's novel, because most of the time there's a lot of information that you have to give in order to make it work. That being said, any and all of these points of views can have benefits and drawbacks, and pros and cons. It's just the way of the world. However, I would highly say that if you want your story to be more immersive and intense, first person present is going to be your best bet. If you want it to be more immersive but a little bit drawn back, then I say first person past, because again, it feels more like a journal entry. So it's more immersive, but at the same time it's a little bit more withdrawn and a little bit less on the edge of our seats. Third person limited present is going to be same thing, where it's like withdrawn because it's not first person, but then we have present, so it re-brings that intensity. Third person omniscient past definitely gives more of a Lord of the Rings kind of feel. I don't even know if it's in past third person omniscient. It's been a long time since I read it, but I'm pretty sure it is. Point being, it gives a very like gentle feel, it gives a very immersive feel while still being very easy into the story. Um, Again, you could try present with it, but it would definitely be very difficult jumping between the points of view. As far as that goes, I think that you could easily choose any of these, even second person or future tense. I think that would be interesting to play with for sure. These are just the pros and cons that are most commonly talked about in writing and why you should or shouldn't choose them based on what you want for your story. The last thing to wrap up, the summer writing contest is still open. We are taking submissions until July 31st, so please feel free to enter as soon or as late as you would like, as long as it's before July 31st. Thank you so much, and I hope that you enjoyed this lesson and that you are able to enter into the contest or enter into contests we have in the future.